Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, it's my hope to do a response video to some of the comments I got on my video talking about Ghost in the Shell, Season 1, Episode 3, Android and I, and the thoughts that cropped up in my mind as far as talking about that imperceptible line, as I called it, of what is going too far when it comes to creating AI and machines that can think for themselves, that could eventually lead to a point where someone has to advocate for that machine as a living being all its own, and what could be considered, in a sense, abusing that. What side of it is going too far, essentially. So I got a couple of great comments from two of my viewers, and I figured rather than just typing up a response in the comments, because it's such a confined space with only 500 characters, per comment and everything like that, I would actually go ahead and recite back what these great people have commented in response, so that way anyone listening can be in on the discussion, and then I'll respond to them in kind. So essentially, the first comments came from NeverAgain41, who says, "You asked what point is going too far. I say the moment we attempt to program emotions, which fearfully enough some are actually attempting to do. However, giving something a soul in the most abstract of sense doesn't seem as bad as giving it emotions. I look to the Tachikoma as an example. The creator worked so hard on them, poured so much effort in, that through that and experience, they gained a soul, it seems." And I think this is largely true, to the effect that, I watched a couple of the later episodes just last night where the Tachikomas are becoming an issue for the major Motoko Kusanagi, in that they are beginning to show individuality, which should not be a consequence of their programming. And I think it's largely debatable what is causing it, from, they're sharing their experiences, but not all being there at the same time to witness them and gaining their own perspectives through their programming. There's also the fact that Bato, the sort of muscle guy of Section 9, he has one that he kind of considers his pet, in that he always goes back to the same Tachikoma unit over and over and over again, and even goes to the, sort of extreme lengths, I guess you could say, of giving it natural oil instead of the same oil all the other Tachikomas are meant to have. And so the Major begins to notice that there are little, shirking of responsibilities going on here and there with the Tachikomas, and they're very inquisitive, and they're starting to question their existence, their role in Section 9. They're starting to question the existence and role of their sort of higher-ups, the Major, Bato, all these other characters as well. And it's just really interesting to see that, at some point the recourse is send them back to the manufacturer and wipe their memory, and when they come back they're more uniform, And I think this speaks to, I can honestly say I absolutely agree with the idea that, programming emotions into an AI, into a machine, is not the smartest move, in a sense. It is a very fearful thing, as you put it, NeverAgain41. But the thing that I would venture to say is also potentially a problem is that we overlook the simplicity of programming, and that quantum leap, for lack of a better term, that is possible, that is capable in that programming to create emotions out of itself, that can manifest it just sort of out of the vapor, or whatever you want to say, out of the electrical sockets and, wiring and all that stuff. I really do think there's something to be said for that being a capability in machines, that, we're going to be feeding it certain ways of responding to people. It'll be asked questions, what is the weather like today, and it'll give you a response. And once there are so many different kinds of responses, I would think that there is the potential danger, for lack of a better term, for it to grow a sort of, especially if it has learning programming, for it to kind of begin to have moods. I think we've seen evidence of this before. I've read articles to this effect, but it's been a long time. I don't know if, there's been any further progress along those lines. But I do think it's quite fascinating. Going on with NeverAgain41, they go on to say, speaking to the episode itself, I never really liked it, talking about Android and I. Then again, I was very young when I first viewed it, so maybe my ability to process it was much lower. Actually, one of my favorite episodes was right before that, called Testation. It also gave me two of my favorite BG songs ever, called E-Human and Beauty Is Within Us. And I absolutely love the Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex soundtracks. I have several songs, and I always fail at remembering what they're all called. But from, the title sequence to the end title sequence to different songs strewn throughout the series. I love, there's this one beat that they play through all the action segments, and I can never remember the name of it, but I absolutely love the music. Yoko Kanno is the composer for the series, and she is the one who brings all this music in. I don't need to go on about how awesome Yoko Kanno is. I mean, from Cowboy Bebop to, Ghost in the Shell to doing music for the more recent series, Kids on the Slope, which was a 60s jazz music-based show. The music for Ghost in the Shell is just fantastic. I love pretty much all the episodes of Ghost in the Shell. There are some that stand out. There's, I think, season 2 episode, second gig episode, where Motoko becomes a sort of cat burglar to try to get inside this corporate, holding place. I forget exactly what the details are, but, there are little standout episodes, and Android and I was just one, for me, that really made me contemplate the psychology of mankind, how we attach ourselves to inanimate objects, as I was saying in my original video, and what that boundary is of going a little too far into that territory. So thank you, NeverAgain41, for your comments, and I hope I answered them adequately enough, and I'll be moving on to the other viewer who commented, which was somebody I'm voting for having the best name on YouTube ever, and I'm serious, Chesty Von Chestington. I absolutely love that name. That is awesome. And he or she says, well, from my point of view, humans essentially are biological computers, and even we, more often than not, have troubles handling the emotions that we must live with. So to answer your question, the point that can be considered going too far would be if we attempted to program these emotions that we can't fully comprehend ourselves. And that's pretty much similarly to what NeverAgain41 said, and I absolutely agree. I think going into that process, which I know is actually, there are some scientists and machinists, or whatever you want to call it, people who are in the business of programming AIs and seeing how that all works out, are actually beginning to do that, little by little. They're taking sort of the first mouse steps into that arena. But I do think, as troublesome and meddlesome as that is, there is still that possibility, as I say, falling back on my term, a quantum leap in the programming to create and manifest those itself. I think that is a potential danger in that, if a machine can become self-aware and have emotions just sort of manifest, well, that's even potentially more dangerous, because if they're not there, if they're not in place going into the programming, surely enough, the reaction is eventually going to be, well, why am I here? Why did you create me like this in your image, if that is in fact the case, if it is a, sort of humanoid machine, android, whatever you want to say? What about all of these things that you were doing to me before I could think for myself? And that's the question. If it becomes self-aware enough to say, you abused me, you were taking advantage of me, you were making me a slave to you, it's kind of like that Matrix, mentality. Will there be an uprising in machines? I'm not so fearful of that. I just think it's an interesting psychological, emotional, and technological dilemma that we have in, are we going to be able to rein something like that in, or will we have to, as some people theorize down the line, will we have to fuse with that through cyberization? And that actually segues on to the other comment from Chesty Von Chestington. Also, I must ask, since this relates directly to your topic in Ghost in the Shell, they often mention cyber brains, which to my understanding is a physical brain which has been integrated with electronic components, essentially cyberized. Would you consider this to be too far? I know that many people dislike the idea of creating true AI, but through cyberization, wouldn't we, in a way, turn our own consciousness into AI? Motoko, for example, no longer requires even her body and can exist solely on the net. And I think that's an absolutely awesome question, because there is a metaphysical process that is depicted in Ghost in the Shell. I mean, the whole title, they talk about having a ghost, having a soul, and that it whispers to them through their mechanized parts and all that kind of stuff. And I think it really asks the question, if a human being has a soul to begin with, what exactly is the way of detecting that? What exactly are the parts that would have to be translated into a mechanized brain or a cybernetic brain or whatever you want to call it? Essentially, it is a brain case. It's hardware, and I've seen different versions where sometimes it contains the actual original brain matter inside it. Others are strictly a computer processor. And to my thinking, largely, by and large, if you are translating your mental processes into, lights and fixtures, into a machine, it's a digital sort of copy of the original. I wouldn't even say it is going to remain the original. It's kind of like that theory about the transporters in Star Trek, where it breaks down the matter and it reconstructs the matter somewhere else, but that matter is going to always be just a copy. And where is that metaphysical line between, is it still the same person? Is it still the same soul? Is it still the same mentality? I think this largely is a discussion you can have about cyber brains and being cyberized. I mean, body parts is kind of sort of one thing, whereas when we're getting into the brain and what runs the body and what makes us all unique individuals, then all of a sudden you're really asking the question, are we going to lose ourselves to these machines? If somebody implants their psyche into a cyber brain, aren't they essentially killing themselves and becoming something new? If they're even becoming anything at all, we could just be translating that data onto a computer hub, essentially a base, and that becomes something all its own. So in a sense, it is as though we're molding through the usage of our own brains and modifying them, if we ever take that leap technologically, which I'm sure we eventually will, of putting our psyches and our beings into machines and stuff like that. Aren't we essentially losing ourselves and creating a sort of AI all its own through our just, mistaken ideals and mistaken ideas of what that is? I think that's an absolutely fascinating topic for discussion, and I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to chime in, comment down below, or has a video response. Anything is welcome. As far as, cyber brains go, would you say if you put your psyche into one, are you killing yourself? Are you creating an AI separate from what you once were, and that kind of thing? I think these are really fascinating topics. That's what I love about Ghost in the Shell. Aside from an action and pathos-laden sort of series, you have a lot of very intriguing questions that it brings up in your mind about humanity and where we're going technologically, that fusion that could one day become between man and machine, and the machines themselves. I think it's all an interesting sort of thing to contemplate and think about. And so that'll be pretty much it for me on this one. I hope you guys enjoyed listening, and I answered everyone's questions. Thank you again to NeverAgain41 and Chesty Von Chestington, the best name on YouTube I've ever heard. And I hope to hear from you. Catch you all later. Peace.